Hello. Starting any minute now, just making sure I've got all my bits and pieces organized here in the lab. What even is that thing? Okay. Cool, got my drawing pen, my browsing browser. We are streaming. We're streaming and recording. I'll close Teams on my big computer and keep it open on my small computer so I can see all of your wonderful comments. I can feel your, if you're waving in the fake Zoom, I'll say I can feel your wave psychically. It looks like we're online in all places, which is a bit of fun. Make sure I got some volume there. This thing's doing the business. I'm going to start my recording before I start talking. G'day folks, welcome to Comp 1720/6720, second lecture for week 6. Class, it is the end of the first half of the semester. We have finally reached this point, the end of week 6 here in Comp 1720. I hope everyone is having a good week 6. I know it can be a stressful time for students when you have exams, other such things, assignments due. You've got an assignment due for my class, I know as well. And as always, you know, just hope that everyone who is in difficult circumstances is going okay, and everyone who is feeling under pressure is okay. There's always stressful weeks in life, but you know that they will end. You will get those assignments in, you will get your exams done, they will be finished, and you will get to have a breather at some point. But I know it sometimes feels overwhelming before you've reached that point. So making sure everything is good with my full screenness. I am recording, right? Yes. You saw behind the mirror there for a minute. Gonna make myself small. Before we get into today's lecture, we're going to be talking a bit about artist statements and a recap of all of the folks about a recap of all of the art theory which we've been going through this semester, just to keep it top of mind, particularly for you thinking about your assignment, but also hopefully you can take a zoomed out view of what we've covered and think about that over the mid-semester break. Hopefully you do get a chance to have some break, and there's a bit of a chance for some of the knowledge and ideas to soak in. And that should be combining with the beginnings of your thinking about how to approach the major project in this course. So before we jump into that, let's just have a little bit of an admin corner. Assignment due. Assignment 2 is due. Assignment due is 2 on Monday. The same deadline procedure, 9 o'clock Monday evening. Make sure you get that in on GitLab. Make sure that you're committing and pushing early rather than later. If anyone has issues with the assignment, the best place for you to communicate that to us is on the forum. If you'd like to talk about how your assignment works, post on the forum, make sure it's pushed up to GitLab, and we can just go and check it out at the test URL, which is, give you instant feedback about it if there's anything going wrong or anything you'd like to talk about. We always try to commit to answering every discourse question, and I continue that commitment. If folks are asking about the assignment like 7 o'clock on Monday night, maybe that's a little bit late. As you might know, I don't tend to do too much work in the evenings answering emails, although sometimes I get to some a little bit later in the evening. But you know, asking questions well in time, starting your assignment early and getting those questions in there is a good strategy if you'd like some feedback. Let's just have a bit of a think about the discourse forum. What's been happening? Well, I just had a look in the pre-lab category last night. We've had 815 pre-lab posts, probably a few more today. There's a few folks who have gotten in with their pre-labs. 815 pre-lab posts this semester, which is just amazing to see so many interesting ideas and discussions about them. I'm really proud and excited about how you folks have been engaging with the pre-labs. We changed that procedure a little bit from last year, and this year I think it's working much better. I'm really enjoying seeing them. Obviously there's 815. I haven't quite covered every single one in great detail, but I do go in there and look at ones that pop out, and I can see some really cool stuff happening. So if you get a comment from me on your pre-lab, you know that I've read it and had a bit of a consider or a bit of a think about it. So hope you enjoy that when I do it. It's just great to see such engagement, and I'm sure that you're learning a lot and developing your knowledge through that. In the non-pre-lab category, Comp 1720/nothing, you can sort of select none as a subcategory and see this on Discourse. We've got 99 non-pre-lab posts, so that's a good number. There's certainly plenty of students engaging with that category, but let's write some more. 99 posts means basically 50% of you have made one post, but I think there's less than 50% because there's a few folks out there who I won't name, but they're probably in the chat right now and they'll jump up, have made the majority of the posts. There's a few folks who really like posting in the Discourse, and lots of folks who aren't just posting their own posts. But look, I want to encourage everybody that, yeah, there's a few people the people in the chat are jumping in now. I want to encourage everybody to get in the forum and make posts outside of your pre-labs. The more that you ask questions, the more you'll get out of this experience. Or even if you just want to talk about something or show off something cool you found on the internet. The more you share, the more you get back from a forum. So be generous with your questions. If you find something cool, be generous and talk about it. Just you make use of the forum. It's one of our most important tools for engagement between all of the students as a body and all of the teachers as a group of folks. So really getting engaged with that is something which is a skill. You have to develop it. You have to decide you want to practice that skill and to try it. So I know it doesn't come naturally for everyone, but be someone who does that. I know everyone's doing the pre-labs work really well, so I'm really happy about that aspect of the forum engagement. Assignment 2 reminders. You're doing your assignment 2. You might be wondering, is this good enough? What am I doing? Is this going to be valued well by my tutor or Charles? Think about these questions. Is your assignment an interactive view through a window? If it is not, then perhaps you need to rethink your assignment. That is the spec for this assignment. Does your artist statement address the prompt? What are you trying to communicate with your interactive view through a window? This is what the information that we, when assessing your assignments, look for in the artist statement. Your artist statement can have many other things in it, but primarily we want the answer to that question. What are you trying to communicate with your interactive view through a window? Hint. This is a hint, technical hint. Sometimes we get assignments and we think, that doesn't look quite right. This doesn't seem to have all of the stuff in it. Then we look at the code and think, well, there's stuff in here I'm not seeing. And then as it turned out, like, we had to get the window size exactly correct to be the size that the student had set to get the assignment to look right. So a hint for developing an assignment which is going to look like has good attention to detail will be, you've tried it at different window sizes, change the size of your window and refresh your assignment, and see that it's still all laid out correctly. And then make the window bigger, press refresh, see that it's all laid out correctly. If you just make your assignment full screen every single time, maybe that works on your computer, but full screen on your computer could be different to full screen on mine. And we had that had this discussion in the forum the other day where someone had asked for help about full screen. I checked their assignment, made it full screen, thought this is good. Then I changed the size of it. I was like, well, wait a minute. Obviously this pot plant is supposed to be on a windowsill. So that's not quite lining up correctly. So try your assignment at different window sizes. Remember, when we think about interaction, that interaction should enhance the experience of your artwork. We talked about interaction last week, We had a whole lecture about it. Go back into that lecture, think about how interaction works, and make sure that the way that your interaction works in your sketch is enhancing the experience, and that it's not sort of interaction for interaction's sake, or even detracting from the experience. So that's something which is a skill to develop, how to design interactions. This potentially is your first ever go at designing interactions. So we're not expecting something as well developed as you might put in a major project, but we're still expecting you to think about making sure that the interaction is enhancing the experience. And the way to check that is to make sure that in your artist statement, what you're communicating is enhanced by interaction. If it is enhanced by interaction, that's good. And if it's not enhanced by interaction, or if the interaction has nothing to do with what you're communicating with your view through a window, then that's probably not as good. It's still interaction, it counts, but it's not as sophisticated an interaction than if the interaction and the communication were kind of aligned. Someone just asked in the chat regarding window sizes, should it be fixed? My preference is that the window size changes according to the shape of the window. So when it makes the canvas, it looks for window width and window height, and that you do all of your calculations for locations of objects based on those variables. That's sophisticated. If you just can't get that to work, then using a fixed width and height for the canvas is okay too, but it's probably not going to quite look as good because, you know, I open the window on my screen and I find that I'm only seeing half the sketch or something. So it would be better if the window size and window height and all of the other dimensions in your artwork were appropriately scaled depending on whatever size of window. But I know that can be very difficult to get right sometimes. You have to make that decision. I can't make that for you. It depends on your design and what you're really trying to accomplish. Don't forget, while you are improving your assignment, commit it, push it, and test it at the test URL. Commit it, push it, and test it at the test URL. We check things on our own computer. We don't use the test URL, but the test URL is useful for you to check that all of the stuff that's important to be in your artwork, will be available to the marker, because the test URL has all of the stuff that comes from your GitLab repository where you've submitted your artwork. If you haven't submitted a file, you forgot to upload an image or a sound file or something, your assignment won't work at the test URL. It also won't work for us when we're marking it. So make sure you test it at that URL. Someone says, can we guarantee the marker will have volume on? Yes, you can guarantee the marker will have volume on, although if you are adding sound to your artwork, just be very careful that it's working well, the volume level is appropriate, and that it's not going to detract from your artwork. It should enhance it. We haven't gotten to our sound discussions yet. That's a week 7 problem. So I'm not expecting folks to do sound. If you are doing sound, well, that's good. But again, all these things, adding extra elements to your artwork should enhance it and not detract from what you've already got. And sound certainly isn't required. This is an interactive, the interactivity is what's required. Okay, time for our art theory section for the day. New art theory. We're going to talk about the artist statement today. The artist statement. And we'll just discuss a few things. What is this whole artist statement thing anyway? How do you make your artist statement good? And what do we want to see in an artist statement? We being the examiners, markers of Comp 1720. Oh, a few more questions about window for a physics world. I mean, the thing after the window may not be the nature world. That meets the spec, yes. The spec was an interactive view through a window. I don't see that there's any kind of world. I don't mention world, I just mean a window. So that's up to your interpretation about what the view should be is completely up to you. Okay, if you've got more questions about the assignment, maybe hold them for the end so I can get through today's content. What do we want to see in an artist statement? How do you make it good? What is this whole artist statement thing anyway? This artist statement thing kind of came up in the forum yesterday. Someone asked why it's called an artist statement and not a coda statement. And I guess in some sense, we expect you to be both artists and coders in Comp 1720 because you're studying art and interaction computing. You're using code to make art. Code is your material. So a coder statement and an artist statement are going to be the same thing. But the reason we call it artist statement is sort of acknowledging an established practice within contemporary art where whenever artists exhibit some work, they will attach a piece of text to it. Maybe it's either physically printed out and next to their artwork in a gallery, or it's on a website, or it's in a little book that comes with an exhibition. And they've got a statement which gives some background information about the artwork, gives the viewer some insight into both the artist's process, the materials and the choices about making this artwork, and what the concepts behind it are. Things that you might not obviously be able to see if you are simply standing in front of the artwork looking at it. And in general, this is generally thought to be a kind of good thing in terms of allowing a deeper engagement, or giving the artist a chance to do a deeper and more direct engagement with their audience. In the context of a course in art and interaction computing, we have a second motive, which is that you have a chance to tell us things about your artwork that we might not be able to see from the sketch itself, from the visual representation of it. And if you get a chance to tell us, then we get a chance to give you credit for it and give you the mark that your efforts deserve, or the evidence of your efforts warrant. So the artist statement is two things. It's a chance for you to communicate the context of your work, and it's a chance for us to hear that communication and give you credit for it, which is really good. But because you have to write it, of course, you have to communicate your work. You have to be able to explain what your process is, and sometimes that can be a challenge as well. So I hope we give you a few hints in this lecture about it. Here's just a little piece of food for thought as a starter. This is a cartoon by an artist called Reinhardt, who was a member of the abstract expressionist movement. And Reinhardt was talking about, had many cartoons and illustrations discussing the modern art scene in America in the mid-20th century period. And in this one, there's an abstract artwork on the wall, and someone's sort of laughing at it. What does this even represent, right? So there was a battle between abstract art and representative art, where representative art would be a picture of a thing, and abstract art would be not a picture of a thing. It's art which is existing outside of representation as a main goal. And now the artwork turns around to the person and says, well, what do you represent? Which, well, why is this funny? Because, people aren't really self-explanatorily representing things. Is that the only thing which we want things in the world to be representations? Of course not. There's lots of things that things in the world can be valued for, and people are valued for many things. Of course, their contributions to society, their personal values, their family life, their work life, all kinds of things that people represent, their achievements. But this guy is being very simplistic about valuing an artwork. It's only valuable to this person if it represents something, and if it doesn't represent something in particular, it's laughably bad. So one way to get around that, why do I mention that cartoon? Because the artist statement gives a direct line between the artist and the viewer to explain some of these things. So the artist can tell the viewer why an artwork is valuable and interesting and worth looking at. So it's one of the ways in which artists regularly write. Artists write manifestos, treatises, press releases, and artist statements. Many things artists write about. Artist statements is one of the really important ones. There's no formula exactly to artist statements, although we will tell you a formula a little bit later. Doesn't have to be a formula. But statements often have the same properties. They often help to build relationships between the artist and the audience, as I said, and in your case, building a relationship between you and me, right? Me being the one that will be looking at your artworks and deciding how to rate it, and you being the artist who's had the great ideas behind it. The artist statement might give some indication of how you would look at an artwork. It would help someone interpret it or understand it. It would communicate why someone has made an artwork. It would communicate how they made it, so the process and the motivation. It might communicate ideas that you were thinking about, so the artist's context in the artist's world, in a world, what ideas were present that motivated this artwork to exist, that informed the process by which it exists, and everything else. And maybe it would explain how it connects to the broader world, so the artist is supplying some hints about the audience context as well, not just their own context. So I know you folks love to see samples, so we'll look at some examples in a minute. Look at some examples of, think of this meme. That's a good meme. I should include it in the lecture next year. I mean, in the real world, artist statements are kind of optional, right? You can engage with art however you want, and some people really want to read all that text, and some people just want to look at the art and make of it what they make of it themselves. Here's these examples, a few artworks. This is an artwork called Excellences and Perfections, 2014, by Amelia Ullman. This is not a typical artwork on the wall in a gallery. It was a sort of performance artwork that unfolded over a long period of time, a period of months on social media. So the artist manufactured a character of herself, which was this super consumerist, super obsessed with their appearance and makeovers and updating their personal presence online in a way which is cliched by influencers and that the influencer culture. So it was a performance long-term over many months on Instagram, and kind of it could be seen of as kind of a joke on her followers, but it was an artwork as well. So here is some text written by the artist about it. Excellences and Perfections developed from a video for Mocha TV, which attempted to fully immerse in screen reality by fabricating a fictional character in 3 different episodes. The idea was to bring fiction to a platform that has been designed for supposedly authentic behavior, interactions, and content. The intention was to prove how easy an audience can be manipulated through the use of mainstream archetypes and characters they've seen before. The performance on Facebook combined photographs from the Instagram accounts, appropriated statements, status updates, music videos from YouTube. The process was slow. Repetition was the key for credibility. So what's the... just deconstructing this a little bit, we've got some information about the process. The performance on Facebook combined photographs from the Instagram account, appropriated statements, music videos, etc. The process was slow, talking about how this happened, talking about how this became an artwork. Repetition was the key for credibility. But it's the previous parts of it. The idea was to bring fiction to a platform that's been designed for supposedly authentic behavior. That's explaining the motivation, and then the intentions, proving how easily an audience can be manipulated through the use of mainstream archetypes and characters they've seen before. Talks about maybe the audience's context, what impact this might have on the audience and society. So this is meeting some of those criteria on the previous page for an artist statement. Connecting with the audience, giving further information about motivations, process, and context of the artist and the viewer. Here's another art work. This is sort of a performance artwork or experiential artwork by Li Mingwei called Mending Project. And in this artwork, the artist sits at this table and mends pieces of clothing and has these different spools of fabric to use to do that. And audience members can, I think they contribute a bit of clothing to this big pile, and the artist works on fixing problems with it, or maybe just adding thread in some way, and viewers can sit there and watch him doing so. So here's the artist's statement. In the Mending Project, 2009, my interactive conceptual installation, I use very simple elements: thread, colour, sewing, as points of departure for gaining insight into the relationships among self, other, and immediate surroundings. It also constitutes an act of sharing between a stranger and myself. Visitors initially see a long table, 2 chairs, and a wall of colourful cone-shaped spools of thread. During gallery hours, I'm seated at the table, to which visitors can bring various damaged textile articles, choose the colour of thread they wish, and watch as I mend the article. The mended article, with thread's ends still attached, is then placed on the table with previously mended items. Owners are asked to return to the gallery to collect their mended articles on the last day of the exhibition. The act of mending takes on emotional value as well, depending on how personal the damaged item is. A favourite shirt versus an old but little used tablecloth. This emotional mending is marked by the use of thread, which is not the colour of the fabric around it, and often colourfully at odds with that fabric, as though to commemorate the repair. Unlike a tailor who will try to hide the fact that the fabric was once damaged, my mending is done with the idea of celebrating the repair, as if to say, something good was done here, a gift was given, this fabric is even better than before. So this artist statement is quite focused on what the process of interaction and conceptual installation is, right? I think that it acknowledges that if someone just walks up, sees a picture of an interactive conceptual installation like this, they don't get an understanding of what's happening unless it's explained, because they're a time-based process. You have to be there, interact with it to understand it. So a little bit more detail about what the interactive process is between the artist and the audience is required in this artist statement in order for someone who reads it to make sense of the artwork. Maybe that's something to think about for your artist statements as well, isn't it? Because the artist statement is a chance for you just to spell out what the expected interactions are in between an audience member and an artwork. So the artist is also talking about ideas beyond what's happening literally in the room, the relationship to tailoring, the relationship to the world and what is happening to these pieces of fabric. The way that this artwork is considering relationships between the artist and other people, which is sort of a relational aesthetics concept, but I'll rather not get too much into that. The concept of emotional value of objects and how certain objects can kind of become artful by treating them in this playful way. So there's a lot of information here. I think it's a very interesting type of artist statement, and it's, I'll just say again, one that is worth looking at when writing your own artist statements because of the way it explains interaction. Another artwork, we talked about this earlier in the semester, Miranda July's work called Somebody. Just to remind you, this was another conceptual interactive artwork where it was an app that you would have on your phone, and if someone wanted to send you a message, it wouldn't send it to you, it would send it to a person with the app who was physically near you, and then you would have to find, that person would have to find you and tell you the message. So you would get messages from somebody, not messages from your phone. So it's a pretty wild idea, really. Here's the artist statement. More about Somebody. When you send your friend a message through Somebody, it goes not to your friend, but to somebody, the Somebody user nearest your friend. This person, likely a stranger, delivers the message verbally, acting as your stand-in. The most high-tech part of Somebody is not in the phone, it's in the users who dare to deliver a message to a stranger. Half app, half human. Somebody is a far-reaching public art project that incites performance and twists our love of avatars and outsourcing. Every relationship becomes a three-way. The antithesis of the utilitarian efficiency that tech promises here, finally, is an app that makes us nervous, giddy, and alert to the people around us. So this is a nice, concise artist statement. I don't know the number of words, but it feels like it's about 200, about the same length as your normal assignment artist statements. The artist statement is tightly written, but it does what it needs to do. It explains what is happening in an artwork which is conceptual and interactive and public, involving both people and technology. It explains why this exists, why this artwork, what the motivation is here, the idea about the utilitarian of tech, utilitarian efficiency, as it's put, the idea of using humans as high-tech objects. These are interesting motivations and interesting contexts that this artwork can be considered in. It doesn't talk too much about the artist's personal experience here. It's more about what is happening with the audience and in the world when this artwork exists. So another great one to look at. And finally, one last one. We talked about this artwork last week, Mount Rothko, which is written in processing, similar to P5. And it kind of reflects the type of artwork which folks often do in a major project in this course. As I mentioned last week, the process of developing this artwork and a lot of the code is listed in a book. You can go and read about it. It's a great example. If you're unsure about how to approach developing a major project, go read this book. The link is down here. Link? Paper, I think, actually, is the link. Coding Art. A great book in the library. You can read it for free. Mount Rothko. As a series of interactive art, Mount Rothko aims at fusing the immediacy of interaction with the qualities of traditional art pieces from artist Mark Rothko. Inspired by specific painting techniques that Mark Rothko explored in the 50s, Mount Rothko is blending all of the background colors together, meanwhile leaving hard outlines in the foreground which would visually locate the form in space. It allows visitors to shift attention, at the same time read one image quite literally through another. Through veils of images, visitors could see the overlayer and underlayer because layers of images are transparent and overlapping each other from background towards the foreground, back and forth. The visitor will never experience a finality within this interactive artwork, which is one that almost unravels in time. Mount Rothko is a multi-layer rendered visual installation by using voice track and position track at the same time. White particles in this artwork have a depth of field rendering. Particles themselves are not rendered as dots, but complex composite shapes. The Connect tracks the position of visitors and changes the theme according to the horizontal position in space. The energy of sound in space is filtered in the two-step process that determines the incremental motion of the mountain starting from a randomized baseline. The energy of sound in space also controls the amount of horizontal movement of particles. So again, this is an artist statement which is describing how an artwork is experienced from an audience's point of view. So if you were just reading about this artwork on a website, this statement was from the artist's website, you aren't there in the gallery, you can't experience it. You can watch a video, but it doesn't describe everything. So there's more of a verbatim or matter-of-fact explanation of exactly what is actually happening when someone sees this artwork in the real world. Another aspect of this, which is interesting, is because this is a very sort of technologically inspired artwork, it's using the affordances of different technologies, the Connect, sound sensing, processing, the material of coding. The affordances of those technologies are used to inform what can be done in this artwork. Those things are explained a little bit here. It's talking about the randomized baselines, the energy of sound in space. That was, in some sense, how loud different sounds of different frequencies are, how the Connect camera would track people moving around the artwork. So these are technical concepts which are explained here a little bit to give the audience a bit more of information about how to interpret what's going on. That's another thing to think about, isn't it? That's what you might have to come up against in your major project, is how, and your assignment starting now, is how to explain what is going on in your interactions in terms of the affordances of technologies that you're using without going overboard in describing every bit of code. Because we don't need to know about every bit of code, but I do need to know that if moving the mouse in a certain way is part of your artistic process for developing this artwork. This also discusses the artist's inspirations. So you can see that they were talking about Mark Rothko's painting techniques and how that informs the visual attributes of this artwork. And that's something which is very important to this artist, evidently. It's where they're leading with that concept in this artist statement. But it's the artist feels that it's important for the audience to know that the visual forms that they've created have a basis within the world of modern art in the 1950s. So that's an important inspirational point for them, and it's important to be communicated. They also talk a bit about the visitor's experience. What is happening with the visitor? The visitor will never experience a finality within this interactive artwork, which is one that almost unravels in time. That's a very evocative sentence, isn't it? A really good sentence. The visitor will never experience a finality within this interactive artwork, which is one that almost unravels in time. So that's not about technology, but it's about how the interaction is evoking certain feelings in this artwork and is enhancing the experience. So if it wasn't interactive, they would experience finality because the artwork on the screen would be in its final form. The fact that it's interactive means that the visitor never experiences finality. And they've got a really evocative concept of unraveling in time. And if you see a video of this artwork, you'll see that it really does unravel a bit in time. It's a very slow process of change. It's not directly connecting everything between the audience's movements and the visual output. It's more of an unraveling, a long time scale. Okay. Oh, take a sip of water. A few artist statement do's. Artist statement do's. And we'll get to the artist statement don'ts in a minute. Tell us how to get the most out of your artwork in your artist statement. What do I have to do physically with my interactive operation of my computer? And what should I be looking at to understand your artwork well? Tell us what you think is interesting about it. So you have limited words. Don't focus on boring things. If you've got something cool in your artwork, lead with that. What you think is important and interesting is what you should be talking about in your artist statement. Do tell us something about the journey, if that's important to you, the process for making your artwork, but not every detail. I don't want to read like someone's diary. Dear diary, yesterday I made a first artwork by making some squares. Then I didn't like the squares, so I made them ellipses instead. Well, okay, who cares, right? I'm interested in the broader process, not in every detail. So this is not Dear Diary. It's a curated or edited version of the process that leads to your final artwork. The important decisions you made along the way, not the boring ones. Importantly for this course, I do give you a prompt to address in the assignment spec. So make sure you address the prompt. This assignment spec prompt, I think, is what are you trying to communicate with your interactive view through a window? That's an important thing to talk about in an artist statement in any case, what you're trying to communicate. But in this case, it's specifically in the assignment, so make sure you talk about that. Artist statement don'ts. Don't tell me what I can already see, right? If I look at your artwork and it's got 3 triangles, don't tell me this artwork contains 3 triangles, right? Well, duh, I can see them. You don't need to tell me things I can see obviously. You could say the 3 triangles in this artwork represent ... something that I can't see. I don't know what they represent, but I do know that they're there. In particular, you don't need to give me every detail of the code because I can read the code. So that's something which we can see. You don't need to tell me how the sketch is created. I use the draw loop to draw the triangles on my screen. Again, like, not interesting information. Finally, don't say stuff you don't understand just to make it sound arty. I know that a lot of people make art about the liminal spaces between such like thing and something else, but unless you're really sure that you know what a liminal space is, maybe not a good idea to go down that pathway. So just clear, plain language is perfectly fine. I think the artist statements we read today didn't really have any big words. They didn't have any $10 words where a 10-cent word would suffice. They were just plain language, very clear expression, maybe a few terms of technical terms to do with the art world, but not a lot. There is a formula to get started with an art statement. This is the classic generic artist statement formula, which would be 3 sections or maybe paragraphs or a couple of sentences for each one, a broad overview of your idea, an explanation of the processes and coding approaches you used. In traditional arts, it might say an explanation of the materials and why you chose them. A third section where you're discussing your personal philosophies explored by the work. So the first paragraph is explaining what the artwork is in helping give some context to the reader about what the audience is supposed to be seeing. The second paragraph is about the process and materials. And the third paragraph is about the artist's internal world, what their motivations are, what ideas led to this and fed into this process of making this artwork. A classic 3-part formula. Good things often come in 3s, don't they? A few prompts to get started. These are just crazy ideas, good writing prompts. Write down 5 questions you'd want an interviewer to ask you and then answer them. Describe a memory that aligns with your work. Use a mind map to put everything you know about your artwork into a mind map and then try to follow that through to write an artist statement. And finally, it's unlikely when you write a 200-word text that the first time you do it will be perfect. Usually there's something that improves with a lot of editing. So my suggestion to you is to take a 0 draft approach. What do I mean by that? That means write a draft early that is not even a first draft. It's just a bunch of ideas in the page. Submit it, put it in your GitLab, fine. And then tomorrow, improve it. Look at the ideas you've got, make them better. Make sure you cut things down to be closer to the word limit and keep doing that multiple times. So have a philosophy that you are editing something and pushing it into shape and not just trying to have the perfect idea first go. One idea for editing that's sometimes useful is to take each sentence of your text and put it apart. So if I'm writing a short text, about 200 words, sometimes I just take each sentence and press enter between them so they're each a separate paragraph. And make sure I've got these sentences in the right order. Sometimes I need to move sections around, delete a sentence if it's not contributing anything. Make sure I just have the interesting and exciting and useful ideas there and have a really complete and compelling description of the artwork. Look at how complete and compelling that one was from Miranda July. I think this one is really good. That's a really short text, but it's very descriptive and accurate and gives you all the information you need. What's the difference between the written description of the work and a statement about the work? And that's something for you to think about. Okay. In the last 15 minutes, I'm going to do a super quick art theory recap. I'll just sip my water for a minute. Do you remember what we've talked about so far this year in the Thursday lectures? I know that there are folks who are probably getting a lot out of these lectures. I know because they've told me, which is great. I think that there are some folks who are perhaps putting these ones on while they're doing a bit of work on other assignments, and that's okay too. But I think when you zoom out and look at everything in context, you'll see how much we've covered and how useful it could be in framing your ideas about art making in this course. So first lecture we talked about what even is art. Just big question, right? What is art? And we got quite philosophical about it. Then we talked about random chance and how that informs variation, and how that's something which is really, really useful in computer art, using the computer to introduce variation in your artworks, and how that's informed by the Dada movement. We talked a lot about how to think about color, which I think was one of my favorite lectures so far. That really gave you a lot of tools for an alternative way of framing color through that hue, value, chroma concept. And if you get into hue, value, chroma, that's really powerful. It can give you a lot of help with choosing colors using the computer-generated color palettes in your sketch. How do we judge art was more of a philosophical basis for attributing value to art, related to that little comic I showed you at the start of this lecture. What does this art even represent, right? This is talking about the values that we use to judge art. And then last week we talked about interactive art and what interactivity can bring art and how you can do that in P5 with making computer-based artworks. So, what is art? We were started with representation to going to look at like anything, right? Is a person standing in a field an artwork? Is a video game an artwork? Is a feeling an artwork? There's lots of questions you can ask, but we decided we had quite a high-level, inclusive representation of defining art, which is that anything artistic should have an excess of je ne sais quoi, an excess of like this feeling of sublime levels of aesthetics, of thought, of process that don't necessarily have a practical outcome. We talked about the context of art as well. We talked about how different contexts in society cause some artworks to be considered not art and others to be considered definitely art. We talked about gallery contexts and interactive contexts and everyday contexts. We also talked a lot about the material that you use in this course, P5, code as a material for making art, and how that relates, or one approach to using that, which was to look at highly constrained painting, and we looked at Pierre Mondrian's work over time, getting more and more constrained, and how P5 lends itself to that kind of constrained art-making approach. And we started with this picture, Albert Namatura's representational artwork of a landscape in Australia, and then ended up here, right, with this, something which also is representational but is framed in the world of abstraction. Random chance. We talked about randomness and how that has been used in art, particularly in the 20th century. And then we talked about how randomness actually is related to rules, which seems a bit strange, doesn't it? Rules are not random. They're specific guidelines for doing something or specific outcomes after specific inputs. But when you have rules and randomness together, you get variation. And that's what we really valued, right? We valued artworks that vary in interesting ways and have interesting relationships between inputs and outputs. So we started off with the Dada movement and this piece from Jean Arp called Constellations, dropping pieces of paper onto a canvas and sticking them down. That's how this is created. So a lot of randomness involved. And then ended up at more technologically based artworks like this one, where the randomness was introduced by this little TV screen down here, which was just displaying static, and the static was picked up by light sensors that were then used to manipulate the person's face, the artist's face, over on the right. So the artist's face was constrained. There was these little motors and movement devices that could move his parts of the picture of his face in different ways. There were a lot of constraints there, but the input was random, and the output was different variations of a face. So our next lecture was about color, right? We did open with primary colors, And then we talked about this concept of a color system, a way of developing all the colors from some small number of inputs. And we talked about how that could be used to develop color palettes and different types of contrasts that could be seen in a color palette. This was our sort of starting point, the color wheel of the primary and secondary colors from the additive world. I don't know what's going on with my pen here. Yeah, here's the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. And you combine them to get the secondary colors. This works for paints, but it does not work for computer graphics, does it? Because with computer graphics we have subtractive, oh no, this is subtractive. Computer graphics we use additive. The additive primary colors, red, green, and blue, which are not as easy to understand how they will combine to form other colors. We're not trained in thinking about additive primary colors from primary school. Like I was taught how red, yellow, and blue combines to make the other colors in about kindy when I was 5 years old. So that's sort of ingrained knowledge. But I didn't start dealing with RGB until I was started coding and making art that way. And then I talked about this other system for representing colors called hue, saturation, brightness, or hue, chroma, value, where we have three independent axes of defining a color. There's the hue, which is like actually what color this is. Purple, blue, green, yellow, red around this circle. And the circle goes around and connects to itself. So it does have the primary colors in here. See, there's red, yellow, and blue. But it's just at one level of saturation or intensity of the color. So then the chroma, getting further out here, is color intensity. And then the value is brightness. And there's two slightly different versions of this system. One, when you get to the top, everything becomes white in this original Munsell color system. And when you get to the bottom, everything is black. And then there's another system where if you're over here and you get to the top, that's still blue, it's not white. And that's hue, saturation, brightness. And down here, it will still be blue. Whoops. Maybe. And it's only white and black when you're at zero chroma. So we did experiments with that in P5, and I do encourage you to get back to those experiments and try them yourself. Here was a lecture from week 4. It was a bit of a disrupted week because of the lockdown in Canberra, but I gave you a replay of a lecture from last year from Tony Curran, and it was about how we can judge art, different ways of judging art. I know some folks jump in and say, well, art is subjective. I really disagree. There is certainly a degree of personal appeal for different kinds of art, and I would say there's a subjective view about what art I would want in my house, because I like to have certain things around me. I like to have a certain design in my life. But most people will agree that certain artworks are good and certain artworks are not. Everyone agrees that, the Venus and Birth of Venus artwork is beautiful, right? It's aesthetically beautiful. It's not a subjective matter. It does have this kind of basic widespread appeal. But that doesn't mean everyone wants to have Birth of Venus in their house, so there's a subjective area there. But there are some more objective ways of talking about how to judge art, and these were the three that Tony talked about. The ethical aspect, is it good for the world? The poetic aspect, is it made well? That's sort of just the construction of it. And the aesthetic aspect, what do I feel when I look at it? Is it beautiful or not? And things can have a high level of aesthetic appeal. I guess I shouldn't have said beautiful. Things can be ugly, but also have high aesthetic appeal. It's not exactly about the kind of the positivity or negativity of aesthetics. It's about the intensity of the feeling, maybe. That could be one argument. So, the ethics of things. Here was a picture that Tony talked about. This unknown portrait of an Aboriginal girl, which is considered to be just really kitschy and pretty rude art, really. It's hanging in the wall of a very famous hotel in Melbourne, a pub called the Union Hotel Fitzroy. You might even have been there if you've spent any time in Melbourne. It's the kind of thing which you do see in pubs in Australia, and it was a very popular kind of artwork in the early 20th century, maybe the mid-war periods, 1930s, 1920s. It's sort of unethical in some way because it's lying about something. What is the lie this artwork is telling? Well, it's telling a lie about what the First Nations people of Australia are like. It tells the lie is that they are kind of innocent people that just exist to appeal to white people's preference and appeal to their sensibilities. So there's a picture of the young woman. She's smiling sort of provocatively at the camera, at the artist, not the camera. It's a painting, and like this person doesn't exist. This person was made up by a white artist to represent an idealized view of what Aboriginal people were like. And in fact, it's an infantilizing view because it ignores the fact that Aboriginal and other First Nations people have their own rich societies. It ignores the fact that white people, colonialists, who've sort of erased systematically those societies, and instead tries to popularize the view or portray the view of Aboriginal people as innocents, as people who just exist for the colonialists to look after and to appreciate, which is a pretty horrendous kind of approach when you think about it. So it's a lie. It's an artwork which is a lie from an ethical point of view. Poetics is something well made. Well, Avengers Endgame is certainly a well-made movie, but when I watched Avengers Endgame, I just thought, what is even going on with the world? I don't understand what's happening. I know a lot of folks like it, so if you're a massive Avengers Endgame fan, then I hope you're not offended, but I think that, you know, particularly in the blockbuster movie franchises that we see in the last 20 or 30 years, the excuse me, the poetic approach is privileged on top of the others. So the construction of the film is perfect from a visual effects approach, more so than the aesthetics or the story or the characters, right? It's all about the visuals, it's all about the construction. And finally, the aesthetic approach. Here's an artwork that's often considered objectively to be beautiful, have a high aesthetic appeal, just what it makes you feel, apart from the other aspects. The Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog. Final few slides. I'll get to the end of this lecture. We talked about interactive art, and this is very relevant for your assignment 2 and forward. Really, the definition of interactive art that I want to focus on is art where a feedback loop between participant and artwork enhances the experience. So if you want to do well, you want to do excellently well, get upper marks for these assignments, make sure you've got that feedback loop between participants and artwork. Interaction doesn't just happen, it's designed by you, the artist. So you need to understand how a participant knows what to do. How do you do that? Think about the affordances, the action possibilities of your artwork. Think about how someone will use those affordances and what will happen when they do. How will they know what to do? How will they know what to feel? How will you know what they're going to do next? So that's designing the interactive experience. And it's not just making games. Games are a specific type of interaction. Some games certainly can be artful. Sometimes games are actually artworks and rather than a game, but it's not just making something a game is not necessarily going to guarantee that this first property, the feedback loop between participant and artwork enhances the experience, is true. So this is the one I want to highlight. That is the definition. We looked at a few instances of interactive art, beginnings with the idea of doing these public installations with the Groupe de Recherche d'Art Visuel in the 60s, changing the way people interact with the built environment of the city and playing on that. Then we looked at lots of technologically inspired interactive artworks. Ones in public, like Illumicube in Canberra, and we talked about how the affordances of this changed over time and made it annoying rather than artful, and it had to be moved and updated. And then artworks like this one that I made called Strike on Stage, where there was interaction between performers and a screen using the webcam as our kind of interface. And that's where we're at in Comp 1720 Art Theory lectures on Thursdays. Jump into the chat if you've got a question right now. I'll stick around for a minute. But I hope you've had a good 6 weeks. We've certainly had some disruptions, but I think we're doing pretty well actually in terms of making sure that we're covering the course material. The assignments have been going well. I'm really pleased with everyone's contributions in the pre-labs, and we're getting a lot of questions on the forum, so by and large, from my point of view, things are going well. Oh, and there was the course feedback, which was positive. So if you don't think things are going well, let me know. Send me a message in the forum. I want to know about it, because you've got a few weeks, and I've got a few weeks of thinking now before we start up in week 7. And there's certainly chances to get back on board with things if they're not going well for you. So, what is the feedback loop that we are expected to be using in our assignment? That's for you to invent. A feedback loop between the viewer and their interactive world through interaction. So the feedback loop is another way of describing what you're trying to communicate in your assignment. How does your assignment change in response to the viewer's interaction in order to enhance the experience and change over time? So that's a feedback loop. I did have a whole lecture on interactive art, so if you're confused about what interaction is, go back to last week and have a look at that. Julian's making some more Charles memes. Okay, I'm calling that time to go. I will see you folks in week 7, so have a great mid-semester break.